Hey, welcome everyone to today's webcast, Preparing for the Future of UEBA and SIEM. That's right, SIEM, SIM. Although I've seen it the other way too, and I was almost going to, anyway, poll the audience about which way is correct. In any case, we're excited to be here today. This webcast is sponsored by Logarithm, which you can see behind me. I'm standing on the new webcast set. Isn't it beautiful? I have here with me today to talk about the future of UEBA and SIM, Mr. Michael Santarcangelo, the security catalyst himself. Welcome to today's webcast, Michael.
It's always exciting, Paul. Although I'd love to be standing next to you on that spiffy new set.
It would be nice, right? It would be nice. Next time. Mr. Seth. Well, sorry, what was that, Michael?
It'll happen.
So Mr. Seth Goldhammer is here with us. He's the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Logarithm. Seth, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Just some administrivia. We will make the slides available to everyone on the broadcast today, as well as if you registered and didn't attend. Of course, if you did, you're probably not hearing me talk right now. But if in the middle you have some emergency that you have to attend to or what have you, all of the slides, all of the video recording will be made available to everyone who registered. So don't worry if you can't see something in the slides. You'll be able to review those materials afterwards. So just the agenda. We sent out a survey. Thank you to all of our listeners and subscribers who participated in our survey, asking you questions about SIM and UEBA. So we'll go over the results of that survey. We'll talk a little bit about what UBA and UEBA and the differences between them and where it fits in your security program. Well, also, one of the main themes for this program is how do we measure the effectiveness of our security solutions? So we've got all of that to cover today. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit about our survey. I want to give you a little background about surveys. We've covered surveys on the Security Weekly Network since its inception. And I think oftentimes when I look at the survey results, I kind of just shake my head. I had a minor degree in like environmental science, and I had a really awesome teacher that taught me how to think about experiments and data collection the right way. In fact, one of his first exercises, we corrected the exercise in the book. And so when I look at surveys today, I'm like, oh boy, a lot of them are just really like so far off the mark and don't tell you anything meaningful. Our surveys aren't that. Right, Michael?
No, that's exactly right. You know, it's we spend time both listening to what people want to know, and we got a chance to talk with our friends at Logarithm, and then we sat down and talked and said, all right, but what do we really want to know? And we had a pretty tight constraint. We wanted this to be really fast so that someone could just zip in, but also useful. So we looked at it and said, okay, if you were to take the 2 minutes to fill this out and then look at the results, are they also useful to you? Does it validate you? Does it let you know what to aspire to? Does it help you understand what everybody else is going through? And then does that inform what we talk about, or does that inform the programming on the network? If it does those things, then it's useful and it's beneficial. And so that's exactly what we did. And by the way, that's exactly what we found. So to just echo your sentiment, thank you for taking the time. Like we respect your time, and you gave us really good information that we're going to be able to talk about now and build on. So thank you.
Yeah, which is awesome. I'm excited. And in this first question that I have here on this slide was a shocker to many of us. The numbers that we would hear in terms of how many security specific products, platforms, and solutions you are managing in your environment, I think we've been told, I don't know, maybe through other surveys, Michael and Seth, or not sure where they came with the number, but I think collectively we thought the number was around 30. According to our audience, that is not the case.
Yeah, I've heard that as well from other surveys, other vendor surveys. We've heard 30, even 40 as an average. So it was a bit of a shocker, although I think there has been a lot of consolidation in the market that's occurred. And also just, I think, managing that many tools, knowing that many UIs, performing that much work across all those tools is just brain damage. So I think a lot of analysts are consolidating down what are a specific set of tools that are helping them to actually get the job done.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was doing an analyst briefing today, and the vendors specifically called that out and said, look, not every organization has a team of security professionals that can tie together 30 different solutions, work with the integrations, understand them well enough to be able to integrate them to accomplish a goal. So therefore, there are alternatives to doing that, and buying a solution that basically doesn't require that you go acquire 13 other ones to accomplish certain tasks. So, Michael, I didn't know if you had any more insights into kind of the number of products that people have in their environments today.
Well, yeah, I mean, keep in mind, we do a survey like this. This is all perception survey, so there's no validation on this. We didn't count up how many you actually had. We didn't ask you to pull procurement or anything else. And so what kind of surprised me is this skewed a lot lower than what we tend to have reported. Not sure if it's significant or not, but either way, it looks like, the bulk of people have somewhere between 10 and 25. That's still a phenomenal amount of procurement and licensing and agreements and training and figuring out. And so it'll be interesting if we ask this question again over time. And if you filled it out, I mean, think about, did you just answer it like I sat there and counted on my fingers how many we had, or did you actually look at the number of contracts, and that'd be interesting. But see, those things add a lot of time to this.
Yeah.
So what I'd be curious then is how, if you're watching, how does this match your experience? Are you sitting there going, yep, no, guys, that's what I got? Or are you looking at it going, oh, I wonder what I forgot. All right, I should go check. But either way, what it's telling us is there's a lot.
And maybe, Michael, to your point, people could express they might have a bunch of contracts, but how many tools are they actually using? Because that would be interesting information.
That's a great question. Yeah, I love that as a follow-up.
The next question was, how confident are you in the effectiveness of your cybersecurity approach? Michael, do you want to give some insights into why you structured the question in this way? Because I thought it was very specific and very good.
Yep. Thank you. So there's two pieces to this. One of the things, and I've learned this over the years of it. Oddly enough, my degree covered qualitative research, so I had some experience looking at this. But what I also wanted to do was make it so that it was a little bit more natural language. I really, and I think most of us disdain these questions they feel so formal. And I get why people try to do that. The downside to trying to do that is you sometimes strip away the nuance. So what we did was we came up with a set of responses that we thought made sense to us, and then we sampled it. We checked it. So this wasn't just done in a vacuum. By the way, it could always do stuff better, and we'll kind of figure it out. But here's what we try to take a look at. One of the trends that we've seen popping up a lot, maybe even in the last year, is the discussion of effectiveness, because we're fighting for more budget. We're fighting for more budget. We're fighting for more people. We kind of need to keep making that case. And so the question then comes up and says, all right, how are you doing that? And it's always about a confidence thing, right? It's not about how are you doing? How are you doing? I'm doing fantastic. No, how confident are you, though? Right? I'm not just worried about your assessment, although I would prefer people felt better than worse. But now the question is, so what's your level of confidence? How are you doing with this? And what's kind of interesting then in these responses is, and we worded it so people had kind of that out, but to say, we're good, or we kind of figured out. I think we're okay, but I also think we could do better, was the most popular. But then, we can't possibly manage it all. Now, here's why that doesn't surprise me. Most of the clients that I go work with, and let me be clear, I'm working with high performance teams, but they're at that range where they've gone, they've crossed over 15, they're still maybe under 25, and they're overwhelmed. They're running flat out. Too many tools, there's too many alerts, there's too many priorities, too much of everything. And when you get to that level of overwhelm, a natural thing is to say, I completely realize I'm not even sure if we're focusing on the right stuff. And I don't know what to stop. So the other reason we ask this is this fits into, so how many solutions do you have? And then a couple of the other questions, how your level of confidence at some level is pegged to how you did with the rest of these questions.
Well, I really think, if I, from my perspective, especially when I've worked for organizations, I really relate to, it seems like we're doing okay, but I could probably do better, because most of the time when you're sitting at the analyst console, you're like, yeah, I think everything's in good shape. I don't see anything that is on fire today, but I still feel like I'm missing something. And largely, I think that's because the attacker techniques are changing, the tools are changing, the technology across the board, good guys, bad guys, is always changing. So you're like, did I really keep up with all the changes, or am I missing something? And then you get in the next day and there's some kind of a breach or security incident, and you're like, damn it, that's what I missed. And you respond to it, and you still feel like you're doing a good job. I know I'm making impact, but I still feel like I could do better, is the point. Because I think We all come across those security incidents, and we all look at logs and maybe you miss something or misclassify something or just feel like we're not getting the full picture. I see Seth like shaking his head, right? I mean, because that's where Logarithm is trying to really help people. I think it's people like myself who's been in that situation, right?
Let me add a piece to this too, because this just came up in a team I was working with this week actually, and it's that question then of are we also doing the right things that support the broader business? And so when you talk about the confidence of your cybersecurity approach, there's the day-to-day, there's the operational tasks, there's the things we're expected to do, and there's a degree of confidence in that. But then that second order question is, so what's your approach, right? Like what we would ask differently than is, what's your approach to it, and how are you using your tools to better inform that? How are you deciding where your team is going to focus, whether it's in an operational capacity, but then go up a level and ask about the strategy? Do you know the top initiatives of the business, and how well are you aligned to them? And that's why we phrase some of these questions the way that we are. And what I'd be willing to wager based on experience is that the people who seem like they're doing pretty well have it's a common way of looking at security in terms of, attacks came in and attacks were put down, and I think we're doing okay. And gosh, it's always changing, and we'd love more people and resources. People saying we're absolutely missing it are either overwhelmed and struggling with that, or they've kind of looked at that and said, the business is trying to do too much, or it's too big, or I can't get my head wrapped around all the things we need to do. And if we ask them, hey, are you doing pretty good on the day-to-day stuff? They would say, yeah, but I'd always love to be better, right? Efficiency right now and effectiveness are going to start going hand in hand. And that's good. Like, this is a good trend. The fact that people are recognizing there's opportunities to get better means we should start actively looking for those.
I think all great points. A lot of businesses are going through digital transformation, which for security teams is really scary, but I think it also allows security teams to play consultant back to the business and help them through that transformation in a secure way.
Love that approach.
I think this question 3 that I have up here, which asked, how do you know what is and isn't working, really speaks to the security industry today and kind of where we're at. And I think that many of us in organizations, right, we've implemented a lot of solutions, we've tried a bunch of stuff, and now we're kind of at the point where you sit back and you're like, what's working and what isn't? Like, we've kind of lost sight of that. And I think, recently I've been taken back to my days working at the university, where I was doing basically a SOC analyst style position, where I was responsible for looking for any security incidents across the network. And I had lots of sources. And then, back then I had grep, right, on the Linux command line, and I had some logs, and, I went at it. And I think we've evolved as an industry to say, no, we've got tools. And certainly I've observed today in our analyst role at Security Weekly, like, wish I had that tool when I worked at the university. Wish I had that tool. Yeah, totally would have bought that tool. That's why Logarithm's a sponsor, because I'm like, I wish I had that tool, Logarithm, when I worked in the university, because that would have been awesome. And so we've adopted all of these tools, and now we're not sure how to measure it. And I think this is a good thing. I think it's a maturity thing that we've adopted tools, and now we're questioning what's working and what isn't. And I think we've kind of come out of the phase where everyone's just acquiring tools because, well, I need security solutions, and that's what security is. I'm just going to acquire a bunch of products and then, not really know how they work or if they work, but I'm going to acquire them and I have them and it makes me feel good. I don't think we feel good about that any longer. I think we're being much more critical of what's working, what isn't, and more importantly, to go back to Michael's fundamental questions, how do I measure it? So, Michael, Seth, comments, questions about this particular point?
It's an area I feel passionate about. I'll share more of my thoughts, I think, later in the presentation. But certainly, I think as a vendor, we have a responsibility to help people out in terms of how to measure. When we provide analytics, did the alarm not fire because the analytics isn't working, or just didn't see anything? And that's a question a lot of people have, and it's tough to answer. And so going back to the previous question, a lot of vendors want to show risk in kind of a red, green, yellow, sort of stoplight, and that doesn't help anyone. If it's green, does that mean I'm safe? Is that how I'm going to report that to the business? So I do think as a vendor, we have a responsibility to help with this maturation that you're talking about as people are trying to get to more of that measurement of effectiveness and what really works and what doesn't. That's an area I think we can help.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead, more to add on this point.
Well, yeah, and I think there's been a lot of really good points made. Here's what I was encouraged by: the number of people that are routinely testing now, right? Because if you think about the maturity of our environments over the last 20 years, and even how much they've shifted in the last 10 years, I love the fact that we're looking at this differently, and that there's such a large percentage of people that are routinely testing, and they're trying to do frameworks, they're trying to do tools, they're trying to look at it this way. Because what's starting to happen now is part of that overwhelm, so I can't maintain all the same tools. Or the business now is coming back. We bought a lot of those tools because there was some new deadline, some new thing happening, some drum to beat, and we drummed up literally the money to go pay for that particular tool. Now they're coming back and saying, why do I need to renew this contract? And what value are you getting out of it? And is this actually helping us? And a lot of the CISOs are kind of surprised that I got to justify this, or I have to figure it out. The thing is, as you test it, and everybody always thinks it's about proving you made the right decision. Sometimes just focus on, are we using the tool the right way? Are we getting more effective as a team? What are the things that we can do? If you start with that, you're going to consistently get value out of whatever it is that you're using. And then you can talk about, was it the right choice? So you can compare other things. But so what I'm liking is people are looking at it, and so the two big things I took away is a number of people are saying, yeah, totally got to do something there. And there's a big group saying, and I'm doing it, and I'm adding stuff into it, and I'm using the evidence, right? So the reason we asked trust me, I've been doing this, or nothing appears to be on fire, that's more that gut instinct. How you feeling? Good. Real good. Why are you asking? Right? As opposed to somebody saying, well, I don't know, let me get the evidence. Let me go look at what we're tracking. Let me go look at what our tools are telling us. Let me go figure out how we can get better. Those teams are going to continue to enjoy rapid success. I had a flashback as I'm working on my slides, and we talk about never split the difference and eliciting that no response. And what you described was that scenario, like, things are good, right? Yes. Like, your instant answer is yes. And I'm like, hey, you're doing horrible and really struggling. No, right? And it's those, responses. So question 4 was about what problems are you using your SIEM to solve? I thought this was pretty interesting. Michael, Seth, do you have comments on this particular question? I'd love to hear what Seth has to say. So let me just tee it up quick, because what I find interesting about SIEM, I'm one of those people who has kind of a love-hate relationship with it. I mean, I get it, but anytime I've been involved in a SIEM project, they're very massive, they're very cumbersome. It takes a lot of knowledge, and that's usually where I come in, right? What are we trying to do with it and figure it out? So by asking this question, it's just interesting to see, so what have you done with it? Like, what are the problems that you're trying to solve, and how are you trying to use SIEM to do it? And I'm not suggesting it's bad to do this. My follow-up question is always going to be, at what cost? Like, is that really the right thing to do there? And of course, those are questions people don't always like. But I mean, when you're looking at the trends, Seth, what are the things that you see when you're working with people? And is there anything here that surprised you?
What was interesting is just the high preponderance of people using it for user-related, at privilege admin, account compromise. There's kind of a theme there where we know that the user, our users are the weakest link in of security, and so it was interesting that we see such a high amount of people using their SIEM to monitor users specifically. To your point, I think where we've seen in the market, failed SIEM deployments where we're doing a lot of displacements. A lot of times it's because people just dump a ton of data into the SIEM and then let's figure out what we have, as opposed to taking more of a use case kind of focus. And we're seeing much more now, customers taking, all right, I'm going to focus on these 3 things. What is the data I should bring in to help me solve those 3 things, and then expand from there. And generally, customers do a lot better with that type of approach, but it is more thoughtful and method. It takes more thought, to be able to do that. So that was kind of my takeaway here. It makes sense that it's spread out a lot across a lot of use cases, but it was interesting that users predominantly took a lot of it.
I think a lot of that is also historical influence as well. If I think back in my career, the training that I've gone to, not given, but been the student, reading books and articles and all that stuff. And when we talked about logs or security, I think we really drive towards, okay, well, when someone logs in, either successfully or unsuccessfully, there's an event generated somewhere, and you should start looking at that. And you should just not look at the failed logins, but the successful logins. That's like one of the most fundamental concepts in security that's embedded, I think, in every single training and certification program and a lot of materials that we read. And that could be why users are really, or security professionals are really focused on getting that from the SIEM. And if you think about it, it makes sense too, right? You want to definitely track who's logging in successfully, who's not. That is a really good indicator. But I think as Seth very astutely pointed out, it's not just about taking in all the data from all of your systems, even if it's of that specific type. You have to have goals and expected outcomes. Like, what are you looking to detect when you do have all those login events inside of a SIEM? What kind of things you want to detect? And then what are you going to do if you find an anomaly? What's your process? I think we're thinking more about those things today than dumping all the data inside of the SIEM. I think we've reached another maturity level in that area as well.
Well, and I think the follow-up question to this, looking at these, in conversation with people, is to say, so are you using SIEM because it was the right fit, or are you using the SIEM because it's what you had, and you weren't exactly sure what this was going to be, and it started as you guys trying to figure out some scripting or coding, and then you said, well, let me hit the SIEM and see if it can do it, and then it kind of rolled itself into a full-blown project, or maybe it's not even a project yet. It's kind of like, sometimes you have the tool that you need because you've thought about the job ahead of time. It's actually a lesson I've been trying to work with my son on, is to say, here's the job we're going to do. Here's the tools we need. If you need to figure out how to use them, let's do that. And then, by the way, when we do that, the jobs go really well. But we all know that sometimes, too, you don't have that tool. So, a screwdriver could be a chisel, right? So we try to make it work. And I think sometimes that's what happens with SIEM too. We've already got a big investment. We've got a team that does it. We've got this person who's a wonder person on it, and they can just make it do anything. Let's go throw this at them and see what we can find out from it. I'm not sure that that's bad, but I just think it's kind of the way it's happening.
Yeah, and it certainly ties into this slide. So I wanted to kind of take a break. It really ties into what we're talking about. And this came from Chris Breton and John Strand at Active Countermeasures, when they were trying to explain how security analysts analyze events on the network or logs or systems. How are you looking at all the events in your network? When this was described to me, I was taken right back to when every day, like, I was the security analyst and responsible for going through events and picking out what was most interesting. And this just instantly resonated with me. And I said, well, we have to now share this with our listeners because it resonated with me so well. So basically, think of all the events on your network as getting a number from 1 to 100. Okay, 1 represents what is the most normal, benign event that could ever happen on your network, right? 100 is something's on fire and someone will probably be looking for a new job somewhere in the organization. Like, it's the worst possible scenario, most easily detected by the security team. I think at 100, now that I think about it, it could likely be an externally reported event. Like a 3-letter government agency has called you and said you've been hacked. All the way down to 1, which is like someone made a DNS lookup that was totally normal for google.com or something, right? So what we tend to do as analysts is in those numbers in the middle, the 20 and the 80, I think fluctuate, based on a lot of different factors. But let's just say in this particular environment that 1 through 20 are pretty easy to identify. Myself, I get into work, and when at the university, for example, I can say, yeah, those events, I'm going to write my script, modify my script. I'm going to ignore those because I am very confident that the 1 through 20 scored events are completely normal. Then I go to the other end of the spectrum, and I've got scripts that look for the 80 to 100. And I'm like, those things are really bad, right? Back in the day at the university, I was like, that system is running an FTP server whose banner clearly says they're distributing wares. Okay, that's bad. That system's definitely compromised. Let's file a ticket for that and get that taken care of. Then I would spend the rest of my day between 20 and 80 and figuring out what is in the middle. We call it the gray area, right? what's in the gray area? How do I sift through that? I think as you gain experience, both as an analyst, maybe you get some different tools. Maybe that varies per environment, right? Smaller environments, larger environments, complex environments, that those numbers in between can fluctuate, right? So maybe I get really good at going all the way up to 40. Events that get a number from 1 to 40 I know are bad, and then maybe it's 60 to 100, but I still have some gray area in the middle. And I think security tools today are really trying to address that gray area and allow not just the senior analysts, but how do we get the junior analysts involved? How do we get other groups within the organization who don't have a security title helping us with this event scale problem? So I thought this was very a useful guide as we talk, and I think that when we choose partners here at Security Weekly, we like partners that help shed some light on that gray area. And Seth will be talking later on about exactly how they do that with examples as well. So
and you said something that triggered an idea too.
Sure.
So what I really liked was you talked about, so let's say 1 to 20 right now, we'll call it your normal range, and you know how to deal with that and or know how to ignore that. My instinct went right to the 60 to 80, and I'm going to circle back to that. But then, it's interesting if you start pushing what's normal and let's say tolerable or normal and easily actionable, right? Because either someone else can do it, it's well coded, you've built a service around it, whatever. If that number starts creeping up, getting that up to 30 just means you cleared a bunch of stuff off of your plate, which is fantastic because now you know how to deal with it. But then what I also realized, and I'm kind of curious both your take on this, it almost seems to me then the ideal is to be operating in that 50 to 80 range, that 60 to 80 range, where these are things that still might at this point require some level of manual intervention. But if you get it at when it's still a 60, that's a lot less worse for everybody than if it gets to 95 or 100.
Yeah.
And so you'll still have things that peak, but hopefully you'll have less of those because you can spend your time at the 60 to 80. And by the way, that means you're specifically not spending time in that 30 to 40 where maybe they'll bubble up and maybe you can codify them off so they become less of a problem, but you're spending your time where you're going to be most efficient, right? On a curve, you're at that point of efficiency. I like the scale for precisely that reason. Seth, when you look at it, did I capture that in a way that you think is effective, or did I miss something?
No, I think that's spot on. I think what's happening in that 60 to 80 is you got a mix of some benign activities that just happen to be very, very different. Someone's just doing something different on the network today, but it's innocuous. And you also have some early indicators of threats that are early in the kill chain. And so I think that's exactly I think the point you're making is that you might be able to now recognize a threat as it's emerging within your environment, mitigate it before it gets farther down that kill chain, before it may do some damage, do some exfil from the networking environment. But how do you do that? So I think that's where looking at all the contextual data around that activity, getting corroborating evidence of. So I saw one anomaly. Are there any other anomalies from that user, from that host? Are there other hosts that look like that or not? How fast you can group all that together so you can determine of that 60 to 80, yes, it's an emerging threat, or no, it's just someone doing something interesting today on the network, but not dangerous. That I think is what analysts are struggling with. How fast can they do that?
Absolutely, good point.
This is the first time I presented this model publicly, and I love the insights from and how thought provoking it is. It really hits the nail on the head. So
that's cool.
Let me add one thing on that, Paul. What you just gave everybody now?
Yeah.
You just gave everybody a new question. So if you're in the audience, take this down or get those slides, because now when you're evaluating a vendor, you need to say, how are you going to help me in that 50 to 80 range?
Yeah.
Because that's where you're going to need the most help. How are you going to help me? How are you going to either help me, right? On the left side, that 1 to 20, I want to make more of that. And on the 80 to 100, I want to have less of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to focus on this part here. Show me how you help me do that. You're going to have a much different experience and conversation than you've had. And by the way, if the first time you ask it, they don't know how to answer it, be persistent. Like, give them a chance to get somebody who's going to come back and talk to you. You'll get the insight you want.
The other thing I love about it too is we call it the gray area, and when I'm in trouble with my wife, we say that I'm in the gray area. So that resonated with me too. I'm in the gray area a lot, so both as a security analyst and as a husband. So, alrighty, question 5: how much are you able to automate? This was encouraging to me, and because I think we've come. This is another, I think, mark of maturity that our audience has been through as well. is that we've gone from being very afraid of automation, maybe automating a couple of small things, to now starting to embrace and implement automation, I think almost out of necessity, but also I think the tools and techniques we have today are certainly much better at being able to automate safely. And it was encouraging to see 42.5% saying they're starting to test automation now.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. This is definitely encouraging. You know, I came from the network access control and IPS space before coming into SIEM, and you know how many people put their IPS and allow and notify, and how many people use NAC but they never quarantine. So in here at Logarithm, we've seen really just in the last 12 and 6 months, this has really upticked. Where you know customers are now much more interested in automation. And I think you hit it on the head. It is by necessity. Because if you have a ransomware activity, you only have so many seconds before you know that this is encrypted, you know, before you can kick that thing out. And so attacks are getting faster in some ways. Some sophisticated attacks still take weeks, you know, for them to move laterally before they find you know interesting information. But it is definitely encouraging to see much more interest here in capability to help provide to that interest.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
How does UEBA impact your view of a security product? I thought this was certainly the trigger for one of our themes based on the audience's response. Roughly 14% were asking, well, what is UEBA? And believe me, when we were talking about this earlier, we don't blame you at all. This has been a hot and fast emerging trend that has seen a progression, right? We've gone from user behavior analytics to user and entity behavior analytics. We've seen it emerge as a category. We've seen it now be incorporated as a feature. And that has been very, very fast. I think it was some of the early episodes of Enterprise Security Weekly, which is a relatively new show here on the network, where we just started talking about behavioral analytics in the market. And we've seen it completely change since then. So I can't blame you. Seth, Michael, you know, comments on this? I think this is one of our main talking points, certainly. Yeah,
you know, what's interesting for me is you have kind of two bookends. You've got the people who don't know what UBA is because it just hasn't they haven't hit across it yet. And then you've got those who recognize, hey, this is a feature set that's coming in, you know, current capabilities I have, mostly with the SIEM technologies that I have, I recognize that this will be a feature. So you know, a year ago or so, as UBA was really starting to emerge, I think there was a lot of questions, kind of what was going to be the place of this capability set within the market.
Yeah.
You know, is this a technology I'm going to go buy and manage, you know, independently? Is this going to take over SIEM as a new technology? And I think now, as the dust is starting to settle, we can recognize most vendors in the SIEM space were bringing this on as a capability set to help enable the fuller solutions that we're trying to provide to the market.
Yeah, on Business Security Weekly, we kept asking the question: is it a feature or is it a product? Kind of like will it blend, but it's a little bit different. And so part of the way that we asked this question, so you know, we also promised you that when you came on, we'd show you kind of what this means. Here's why we asked the question the way we asked it. What I'm curious about is how it's driving some of your behaviors, and so now you can compare your behaviors to some of your peers and/or get some ideas out of this. I think it's fair to say a lot of people are still confused by this. I think it's fair to say a lot of people are confused by UBA. And there's nothing wrong with being confused about it. It means maybe it's not valuable to you, maybe it hasn't been explained to you yet. But if you start looking about it, then the reason I was curious whether people saw it as a standalone product or an important feature is that gives us kind of a barometer of if you're in the field doing the work, okay, does your experience match ours? And the answer here is overwhelmingly yes. So then what I'm also asking in the exact same question, so right, it's how we have to parse stuff together. But so then I'm asking, is it an important feature? As in, when I'm looking at my checklist with this vendor, if they don't do UEBA, I don't have time for this because that's important to me. Or it's it's nice to have, or I'll check it out. Like I'm specifically looking for UEBA. I know it's not standalone. And so therefore, if a feature offers that, or if a particular platform or some tool that I was already thinking about offers that, that might be worth looking at. So that's kind of what we're looking at. But basically, overwhelmingly, this skews to, need it, and it's important. Now the questions are, So are you looking to just integrate it? Are you looking to acquire it new in a new technology? Or do you have an opinion on that? And that's where we still see people trying to figure those things out.
So let's answer the question for our audience before we move forward. I think this behavioral analytics started out just looking at user behavior, and that's where UBA comes from. It's user behavior analytics, where the system is trying to analyze just the behavior of that user. I also sometimes qualify that where it's not necessarily a user, but it's just a set of credentials, and you're looking for the usage of those credentials. So it's not, I think the acronym was kind of flawed from the beginning. It's not necessarily what the user's doing, it's what their credentials are doing, because that could be independent of what the actual person is doing or not doing. Then we came to user and entity behavior analytics, which is analyzing the behavior of the user, but also the entities in your organization. Those are machines, application, data. What actions or observable events are those entities making that can maybe correlate to what those set of credentials are doing or not doing? And again, as we've stated before, this was a category that I believe now is a feature. There are, certainly a number of vendors that exist today that were like, we're a UEBA vendor, we do behavioral analytics, and I think they still do that. Some of them have been acquired by SIM companies. Some of them have pivoted into doing other things. Some have pivoted into fraud. Some have pivoted into different areas. So I think we certainly have all the makings of seeing what was once a solidified or formed a category in the making come out of the end of it as a feature. So just an example, with UBA, we've got Mary. She logs into the VPN from the US every day. Now today, Mary logged in from China. That's analyzing not just Mary's behavior, but her credentials behavior. If her credentials are being used in a specific way from a specific country, that was the most shining example that you saw in the industry. And then those credentials were used to log in from another country, that would trigger an alarm. Now, with UEBA, we combine the user and entity behaviors. So normally SSH connections to two other, so a system will normally make SSH connections to maybe two other hosts on the network, and they're not using Mary's credentials. However, today, that same machine made connections to 30 machines on the network and tried to log in as Mary on all 30 of those systems. If we can tie those events together, now we have a stronger case, right? We've got the abuse of Mary's credentials, and we've got behavior on the network that is not normal. And by tying those two together, maybe independently, those don't rank as high, but together, that can be an event that requires some attention. So, I don't know. Seth, Michael, do you think I covered that okay?
Yep,
I think so.
Alrighty. So, closing thoughts on the survey results, or are we ready to just turn it over to Seth?
Well, let me just offer that, if anybody's got thoughts or comments on it, or they want to ask us more questions, what I love about our approach is always transparent. So we can answer those questions for people and or otherwise. And again, just thanks for filling out, because that it both validated the approach that we've been taking on the network, as well as gave us some new things to think about. And that's fantastic. And I'm excited now to hear what Seth is going to share with us.
Awesome.
Yeah, the first thing I wanted to share kind of plays into the different types of attacks that we see and the types of analytics that we need to see in order to recognize those attacks. Right now, because of some of the UBA vendors, there's a lot of attraction to machine learning. We hear vendors talk about AI, vendors are talking about deep learning. A lot of that's marketing buzz. There is definitely advanced machine learning that's being leveraged pretty effectively in a lot of technologies in the market today. But it isn't a silver bullet. We all have been in security for a long time. I don't think any of us believe that there's ever going to be a single technology that can solve security issues. And that continues to be the case, even in the sense of analytics, where if I know about the type of vulnerability, I know about exploits to that vulnerability, it's going to make sense to use more of a scenario-based analytics approach, which is a lot of the capabilities we've had in the market for a while, advanced correlation, pattern matching, to recognize that in about near real time, versus trying to perform some sort of machine learning and now recognize change with a known pattern. If an account gets created, escalating privileges, and deleted all within a short period of time, we all know that that looks like a temporary account. Let's just recognize that when and as it happens.
And Seth, I think I threw a label on that earlier, and I called it frequency-based analysis. And I think this is something that certainly myself and many others have been doing manually for so many years. We just look at the least frequently occurring events, the most frequently occurring events, and how long something took to take place, and how frequently does it occur. I don't really think you need machine learning to count and do basic math is really all that is. But it's still largely effective today, and I think that's the point you were trying to make earlier and as well today, right?
Yeah, let's use the right tool for the right job. And yeah, if something is effective, it works, don't throw that away just because there's now kind of a shinier tool out there. Use the shinier tool for what that's really intended for. And that's as we're getting to the right side of the spectrum. So as we get away from knowing a little bit about the vulnerability or exploits of the vulnerability to now it's just, there really is a true zero-day, an insider attack, things that you really just can't anticipate. Now we do have to look for just a shift in behavior, some sort of significant behavior change. And back to your comment around that 20 to 80, I would add you really need to look for behavior change, corroborating that with other evidence. Otherwise, you're just going to find anomalies, and there's lots of things that happen differently on a network every day, and that's going, if you're just looking for anomalies, you're going to get bogged down very quickly. So you have to look for those anomalies that have some sort of security relevancy. And so that is where we see a place for different forms of analytics based on how little to how much we know about an attack, so that we can recognize as fast as possible when to now to take some action.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I look at our network here, and I know others have done this, if you're just looking for anomalies, you may see a huge chunk of data being uploaded to the cloud. And, oh my God, that's a security event. It's an anomaly. And it's like, no, it's just a developer spinning up a new, development instance in the cloud. It has to put a bunch of data up there. So, yeah, that totally resonates with me, Seth.
So here, what I want to talk about, this goes into that, Michael, you were talking about asking a lot of your listeners around, is UBA features in a product. What we have seen in terms of that landscape is what's separating SIM leaders and UBA leaders is this kind of recognition that there is a fuller set of capabilities, which I've called Nextgen SIEM because we don't have a better name. It's called Nextgen SIEM because, thank you, air quotes. It is a Nextgen SIEM in that where you are going beyond the SIM collapse into SIM. We're now getting to a next chapter. Where that next chapter is really encapsulating, advanced types of analytics and security, automation, and orchestration, and leveraging, another buzzword, big data back end. So search is just highly efficient and expeditious against, big, across a large data set. Call it large data, and so this I think is interesting, and I think it's so you've got simulators who either through acquisition or through their own development are getting into this next gen SIM bubble. I think the UBA leaders, they've got a little bit of a larger task because they're trying to now catch up to a lot of that SIM development that's occurred within the last 10 years. So they're adding in compliance reports and a lot of the kind of bread and butters that we've seen SIMs have in terms of data processing and in getting to a structured data set in addition to unstructured data.
Yeah, I've certainly seen market trends like that in the past where technology pivots and then those players are trying to pivot back into a larger space, and so it takes them time, or maybe it never happens, to have feature parity with some of the folks that have done it before. So I've definitely seen that.
Yeah, makes sense. This just kind of builds that out. So going back to the tools discussion, so many of the customers we're talking to, this is what they're struggling with. And I think it's one of the reasons why, going back to question number one, we're seeing the number of tools going down from our expectation. Because if this is my world where I'm trying to learn the UI and how data is represented and stored across, whether it's SIM, whether it's UBA, whether it's my endpoint detection response product, et cetera, that's just so much for an individual to try to learn. How am I going to learn how to effectively use all these tools in a way that I can now recognize threat, especially if I'm manually kind of correlating activities across these different tools, or trying to build workflow in terms of investigation across all these different tools. You're just inherently introducing inefficiency into your workflow right at a point in time when I think our analysts are trying to gain efficiency. They're trying to make this as smooth of a process and as predictable and consistent as a process as they can. So that's one of the reasons I'm not surprised by question number one, providing a smaller number than we were anticipating, because of this challenge. If this was the amount of tools I was using, I'm not going to be able to reach the goals, the objectives that I have.
Yeah, and I don't think this is a technical proficiency thing as much as it is understanding what the tools do well and where all their limitations are. And you can be extremely technically proficient, understand TCP/IP networking and all the nuances and vulnerabilities and exploits, but when it comes down to the tool, I think the point that I've certainly struggled with over the years is, well, I'm like, that's great. I'm like, I want this tool to do this. And then like you get down this road and you realize it either wasn't designed to do that, or that isn't the thing that it's best at doing. And then that's how you end up, I think, with a lot more of these other solutions, to be like, oh no, now I got to go get a tool that does this. And I think that's where you end up with exactly what you've depicted on this slide, Seth.
Well, and there's one more thing in this too, and Seth alluded to this in the earlier part of the conversation. Sometimes, or maybe it was you, Paul, sometimes it's not always a security tool that I'm relying on now. Mm-hmm. So, in addition to people probably crying, looking at this panel going, I wish mine was this simplified. It's also then realizing, and sometimes I've got to go work with other teams who might have completely different purposes, or they're going to give me a view that's not completely coherent with mine. And the whole elements that go into all the data collection and correlation, it's I like the title here, right? It's a disjointed workflow. Mm-hmm. But I think what's happening too is it's compounding, because there are other teams saying, hold on, that's our stuff, we can give you the data, or we're trying to claw for it. So it's a multivariate problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And here what I wanted to touch on, going back to, how do we measure success? So even if we're collapsing all these tools into kind of a single platform where we now have a good workflow, and most customers we talk to, they're designing their run books. They know, when I see something that looks like phishing, here's the next few steps I'm going to take. I'm going to get to this decision point. So whether they're doing that with technology or they're doing that on paper, most mature organizations have their run books. But how do you know the run books are effective? And that's, I think, that maturation point, Paul, you were talking about, which is getting to a level of measurement where we understand, all right, it's taking us for each of these types of threat classes, how long does it take us to recognize that in our environment? How long does it take us to get to a mitigation step or a mitigation a conclusion for that? And can we have a set of information about our tasks that we performed, where we can now go back in time and perform the postmortem? How do we get from point A to point B to point C, and what roadblocks do we run into along the way? What customers we're talking to, where they're trying to get at is, if a task in a run book took 2 days instead of 2 hours, is that a people issue? Meaning, it should have been escalated to tier 3, to tier 4 faster in that process to get kind of the right eyeballs on it. Is it a process issue? I was talking to a customer where, every time they were running into a potential ransomware event, they had to create an IT ticket to get information out of an agent that was on, each user's endpoint. They would have to find the person in the IT organization that's got a password into that system. So yeah, it was taking, days to get information that, should have probably just been fed into the SIEM to begin with. But it took that level of analysis to get to, that's the roadblock. And then finally, it's the technology. Maybe something took a really long time because you were missing endpoint forensics or network forensics. There was just a gap in the information you're collecting. And so maybe there is a tool that you need to go out and get, because there's information that is just not being provided to the analyst to help make determinations in the process. But that's where customers want to get to that level of visibility, and I think you're not able to get there unless the measurement can be provided for you. In terms of looking at how fast it is taking from detection to response, what are the steps we're taking, and then what are the timeframes within each of those steps.
Yep.
And here's a screenshot of how logarithm we're doing that. So we are performing that measurement systematically. So as tasks are being completed, as they're moving cases forward, being able to just automatically capture those milestones so that we can create kind of those dashboard views. And for an analyst, individually within a case, where am I in the case? What is my next step in the case? How long do I have to complete that next step on average? And if I'm running over that average, is there a reason for that? So there's things that I might be able to recognize on the fly during the case, or at least have that package of information that I can now perform a post-mortem to, be able to perform that analysis against. So that's what, listening to our customers, what we're looking to continue to build out and provide just more of those insights. I think a lot of vendors in the space, they look at metrics around, they look at open close rates, how fast am I opening alarms to closing alarms? And I don't think that's a great qualifier. One, it's unfair to the analyst. If alarms are opening up faster than they can close, that's not an analyst working hard enough. That's just, that could be the technology isn't designed right. It's not tuned right. There could be something highly interesting happening in the environment.
Seth, sometimes things on the network change.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so what we want to get to is not is the analyst working hard, because we know the analysts are working hard. We want to get to how can we just get better from a program perspective.
So Seth, if that graph on the top, is that saying that like in early March, the cases were taking up, sometimes as much as 7 days to close during that time frame? Yeah. And that's an interesting statistic to have to be able to dig into, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So at the top kind of long chart, those are of all my cases, what is the detection and response rates? And then on the bottom, I could break that down by threat type. So we've got a couple here, phishing and admin misuse, and we could have many more depending on how the customers tag their cases. So this is just working off of tagging. So each customer can generate their own tags that make sense. And then we have some of those, how many cases are being opened up by the type of priority. So are we seeing lots of low priority cases getting created? Well, why is that? Is there, again, that could be a process issue or a technology issue. And same with case status. Are things staying in a particular status for longer periods of time than we would want as an organization? So lastly here is just a look at our product set. So we've designed our product. We have a platform that's got all of our capabilities for looking at users, network, endpoint data, and performing that case management, orchestration, and automation. We have for existing customers, we have add-ons. So the orchestration piece is just built into the product, but we do have an add-on for advanced machine learning we call Cloud AI. And then lastly, for customers that are really just focused on users, we talked about that and saw that, what are you using your SIEM for? If that's your primary use case or your starting point that you want to, initially use logarithms technology for, we have a purposed package just for looking at user and entity behavior. And that again leverages both our scenario-based as well as our behavior-based approaches for looking at user activity. So different ways different customers can participate with our technologies given use cases, their maturation, and what they're trying to do with the technology. And then lastly here, if you're intrigued by anything I've said, hopefully, where can you go for more information? So, Jake Reynolds has been on Security Weekly. He's a great, much more technical than I am. So you may want to look back at the recording with Jake. You've also got webcasts specifically around UBA. This is NHL Players Association, and how they're leveraging our UBA capabilities specifically. And then we're out at trade shows. I'll be at Black Hat personally. So if you want to come and harass me because you didn't like me on Security Weekly, let me know, or the opposite. And please, our website's got all kinds of content.
Awesome, Seth.
Yeah, Seth, I
thank you so
think
much.
they're more likely to come chat with you. Don't slow yourself down. You had great context to
Absolutely.
almost all of these, and I think anybody who's now struggling with that finds in you and your colleagues a good partner to have this conversation with. So I think you'll see more of that, less of the harassment.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I love the show because of the discussion. It's not just kind of a vendor just speaking their piece or kind of pure advertisement, but let's get into some issues that our customers, our end users, or people in the market are just interested in. And so, thank you for having me on the webcast today, because I like this type of format. For me, this is a lot of fun, and so hopefully it was informative and for everyone listening. And if you do have more questions, please let us know how we can continue the discussion.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. If anyone in the audience has questions, happy to address them live on the air right now. If not, the old fallback, if you have any questions about anything you've consumed or watched or listened to or registered for at Security Weekly, psw@securityweekly.com, reaches all of us here at Security Weekly, including the operations staff. So if you've got, I can't get to the slides or whatever, psw@securityweekly.com is the group email that you can use if you have any questions or logistics issues. We will be at Black Hat as well. I hope, Seth, you're able to come down to our pool hut, cabana,
Absolutely.
Bungalow. I forget exactly what.
You're down on the
called a
beach?
hut.
It's a hut. Yeah, come down to the Security Weekly hut in Mandalay Bay pool area. We'll be there. It'll be a lot of fun.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Seth. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to everyone for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.